This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
The final chapter deals with the remainder of human resource planning. So if you remember back to the kind of employment cycle, where you plan the number of people you need, you attract the candidates, you appoint the candidates and so on. We're going to be motivating them and so on, which we'll be seeing later. One of the events which happens most employees is that every year they're going to have a staff appraisal. And most employees kind of look forward to that. We have a natural desire to have some feedback, to find out how we've been doing. And anyway, we want to know what next year's salary is going to be. And these appraisals are, we'll see, not always done very well. But they tend to be a big event in both managers' lives and employees' lives. The point of an appraisal should be to improve the performance of the employee and also to improve the performance of the company because the employees are doing better. The point of an appraisal shouldn't be just to kind of blame the employee for shortcomings and so on, to kind of heap all of their mistakes on them and so on and kind of tell them off. It is not chastisement, okay? It should be supportive. If it's not supportive, you're liable to be doing damage. Anyway, what are the patterns of appraisal? And one pattern of appraisal is that the manager tells the employer what their verdict is on them. It would be you go into your manager, the manager's got a sheet sitting on the desk. Quite often these sheets are filled in from -5, which is unsatisfactory, to +5, which is very satisfactory. Down the side it might have things like technical knowledge, punctuality, innovation, so on, getting on with client, getting on with staff and so on. And the manager has kind of marked, +2, -1 and so on as you go down that. And this is handed to you, the employee, as a kind of fait accompli. The manager says, well, you got +2 there, you got -1 there, etc. And really there's hardly any discussion. And that's pretty pointless. Because very often saying why you got +2 there, the discussion isn't very good. And anyway, you may disagree with it. You may think that the manager has come to an erroneous decision about why you're there. But there's a kind of pride in here almost. The manager is perhaps reluctant to enter into some sort of negotiation or interaction with you and to change his or her mind. But better than that is tells and sells, where again the form would still be filled in, but at least now the manager tells you why you got -2 there and +3 there and so on there. You may have a bit of discussion as to the manager's conclusions, but really the manager isn't going to change it. The manager is going to sell you his or her view, and it's pretty much cast in stone. By far the best way of doing it is problem solving, where employer and employee try to cooperate and come to a view. So this is a bit like going in and the appraisal form is empty, and the manager says, what do you think you are on maybe technical ability? And you say, I think I'm +3. And the manager says, well, I think you're just +1. And then you begin to discuss this discrepancy, if you like, in your judgment and their judgment. It should mean, because the manager hasn't really committed to +1, that the manager should be more open to be persuaded that maybe the judgment was too harsh. And of course, maybe the manager says something to you which persuades you that you have been too optimistic about certain elements. But this is a much more supportive way of doing the appraisal, and it's supposed to be really good for much more information exchange. You need a lot of information to do the appraisal. Quite often what the manager will do, they will go out and they will ask your colleagues They will maybe ask clients you've worked at and so on and so forth. There is nowadays something which some just call a 360-degree appraisal, where you appraise the people below you, appraise your colleagues, you appraise your managers. So, and often it's done on a kind of anonymous basis, so you're not frightened to tell what you perceive as the truth about a manager and so on. Now, there are barriers to human performance appraisal, which are frequently met in appraisal interviews. Confrontation. That there's a kind of going in, the manager wants to criticize, and the employee is obsessed with trying to defend what they did and so on, and there's really a kind of a bit of an argument and a disagreement. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. And so on. Emotions run high. And once emotions run high, then the communication tends to break down. It can be too judgmental. The manager takes a view and is not open to anything that the employee might say to defend themselves. And the employee might have very legitimate grounds for defending themselves. Too much of a fireside chat. Maybe the manager is frightened to criticize, and it ends up even with no gentle criticism, no hints about how you could improve and so on there, it ends up being a bit of a non-event. Bureaucracy. We're doing the appraisal because the staff handbook says we can do the appraisal. I have to fill in these forms. And in a way, very little thought is given to it, very little research perhaps done by the manager to really do a full and fair and useful appraisal. Managers just wants to get these bits of paper signed off and then get on to a more interesting job. It can be an event. We do an appraisal every year because we do an appraisal every year. It's a bit like a bureaucracy there. But again, it's time for the appraisals, let's do them, and it becomes kind of automatic and rather mindless to be doing them. And finally, unfinished business. We do the appraisal, promises have been made. I promise to send you in a training course, but nothing ever happens. I promise to see if you could maybe be seconded to another department, but you never hearing back from me and so on. Maybe as an employee, I promise to do better in some area, but again, I get no feedback partway through the year that I'm doing better. The whole thing just kind of falls into a void. And even though we may have started doing the appraisal full of good intentions, it's never followed up. And again, it becomes pretty useless. Competency frameworks are increasingly found as part of the appraisal process, indeed part of the recruitment process. What you do is you look at a person's job and you break it down into certain competencies here. You should be able to work Excel to a very high level. You should be able to work the accountancy package to a reasonable level. You should be able to negotiate with suppliers reasonably well and so on. You should be competent at presenting to clients, doing a bit of public speaking and so on there. So this is broken down as competences. And then what happens, maybe the manager gives you your actual performance. So here we have trainers, managers, colleagues and so on here. They will make some sort of judgment there about your actual performance, and there is a kind of target performance for you to get to. So it says, right, you've hit everything you need to do on Excel, you're absolutely fine on that, all over it, but actually you're not actually really very good at doing presentations. Maybe what we'll do is we'll send you on a kind of public speaking course to try and raise your actual performance towards what the target should be. Training and development. Training is a very specific episode, usually where you're given training for immediate need for your current job and for something which you might be using tomorrow. So if you join a company, you might be given training on using their accounting system, because that's what you're going to be using in a week's time when you actually, start working kind of properly. Development is a bit hazier. It's a bit longer term. Yeah, you mightn't use what you learn in your kind of development course for a year. But if you're going to be a manager, then it is known that at some point in time you're going to be entering negotiations with suppliers. At some point in time you're going to be interviewing potential new recruits. At some point in time you're going to be making a presentation to clients. And it's good to have all of these skills in your armory, even though you don't need them today or maybe for 6 months, and maybe you don't even need them till you get another promotion. But once you get that promotion, then you are equipped to do that job. So that is development. So training is immediate. Development has an eye much more on the future. All sorts of ways of doing it. A lot of training is where people go often out of the building to formal training courses, like a lecture for a day. And this can get a lot of information across very, very quickly, particularly if it's out of the building and you ask people to switch off their mobile phones. It can be largely free of interruption as well, and can be developed by or delivered by specialist external trainers. Difficulty with that is that sometimes the training which is actually provided doesn't quite target, the job that you're doing. And it might be better, instead of going outside and hoping this external trainer knows what you need and knows exactly how your company operates, is to go for what's called coaching. And coaching is more or less where you watch people and accompany people, and you learn by observation, really, what skilled people are doing in your organization, and then you kind of do it yourself, and they'll be kind of watching you and so on. This is a way an awful lot of audit training is provided. And you, as the new starter, you get a little bit of formal training first about some of the background in auditing, but then you're sent out with a more senior person, and this more senior person tells you exactly what to do, will review what you've done and so on, will kind of correct where you've maybe made errors and tell you to go back and do a little bit more work there and so on. This is coaching. It's very, very focused and should be very, very accurate on helping to do what the job actually is. Shadowing is sometimes used. You're not actually working yourself, but you're going around and watching a more senior person. There can be, as you're having now, computer delivered or computer-based training software and so on. These packages can be interactive packages. They ask you questions and so on. Sometimes there's simulation packages where they can provide a whole kind of host of different situations that maybe you'll have to deal with in real life. It's obviously self-study and manuals and so on. And sometimes, particularly larger employees, and larger employers rather, will sponsor people to do part-time degrees or MBAs, or maybe to go for CIMA type qualifications and so on externally. They see this as part of really the development of the person, that in 2 years' time we would like this person to be a qualified accountant, because the sort of job they'll be doing there, they'll do much better if they're developed and have managed to get that sort of a qualification. Training has to be designed carefully. Training is expensive. Training means taking people away from their jobs very often and paying maybe somebody to deliver the training. If the training isn't done well, then it's kind of pretty pointless. People will be doing the wrong things. And the first thing we need to think about is what's called a needs or a training needs analysis. What training does this person need to carry out their current role, or maybe to carry out, if it's development type of planning, to carry out a future role? And we have to say, after they've been on, let's say it's an external training course, what should they be able to do? It's almost like setting a little exam. You don't normally give exams, but we'd want to say, after this day's training on Excel, what are the the 6 things, 5 things, 4 things, whatever it is. What is it that we would like to come back with that they're now capable of doing? So as a needs analysis, we have to have some way of measuring or setting a target, if you like, at what they should get out of the training. We plan the training in some ways, in-house training, on-the-job training, computer-based training, formal course training, and so on. And then we make sure that the training is delivered to that person. And ideally, we'd get some sort of feedback on how successful it is. Maybe the trainer gives us feedback. Yes, that person seems to be able to do this now. Maybe we give an exam, and in some industries which are heavily regulated, like investment industries, there are exams to make sure that people are competent in doing their jobs. Maybe we find out whether or not they've become competent by observation of them when they come back to the office. And if we found that the training has been ineffective, then something's gone wrong up here. We've either given them the wrong training, or we've given it in the wrong way in some way that it's gone off the mark. And it's all been a bit of a failure and a waste of money, and we have to really rethink this training process again. Induction training is one particular sort of training, just to mention. Induction training is given to new recruits. Its objective is to make people feel welcome and confident and make them competent as soon as possible. So in some jobs, induction training might be half an hour. You bring them in, you introduce them to their colleagues, you give them a computer log on, you show them where the coffee machine is, you show them where the fire exits are and so on, you show them how to work the phones, give them their identity badge, and that's about it, really. In other jobs, induction training could be a couple of weeks. When I was becoming an accountant, we had a 2-week induction training course because we had to learn what is auditing, what's all the audit documentation and so on, how does an audit actually progress. And until we had bookkeeping knowledge and auditing knowledge, we were really a waste of space. But we want to make people comfortable, welcome, and we want them to hit the ground running. We want to be productive as soon as we possibly can. Now, when giving training, we have to be aware of different, theories about training. How do we go about it? How will people respond to training? And there are, first of all, 2 approaches to learning theory. There is a behaviorist approach and a cognitive approach. And the behaviorist approach really trains people to do things by almost reward and punishment. If you do this, then you're not going to get into trouble. If you do that, then you will get into trouble. And people are not necessarily taught why one thing is right and one thing is wrong. The original behaviorist theory was kind of invented by a man called Skinner, and he had what was called a Skinner box. And in the Skinner box, he had a pigeon, and the pigeon learned that if it pecked a particular mark on the wall, out would come a little piece of food. And you could train it to recognize a mark. It didn't matter where you put the mark, but wherever this little red circle was, it would go and peck it, because it knew, if I do this, then I get a reward. But it had no understanding of what was happening. But there are some jobs, maybe, where it's going to be very difficult, or maybe too time-consuming to train people to understand why they're doing it. You just have to make sure they do it safely and consistently. The other approach is a cognitive approach, where you actually want to try to teach people why they're doing something, to actually transfer a kind of understanding to people. The people you're teaching may have to be better people. The training may take longer, but at least the training, when it happens, tends to be more open-ended. It's a bit like your pigeon. You put a red mark there, it gets used to the red mark, but what happens if suddenly you start putting a blue mark on the wall? Is it going to know, oh, it's a mark, I can peck it and get food? If you were doing a cognitive approach, you would more or less say to people, if you see a mark, then understand that pecking a mark gives you food. Your understanding is slightly different, slightly deeper nature of the problem, but it may take longer to transfer that understanding to the person. Honey and Mumford looked at different learning styles, and the issue here is if you are training a room full, let's say, of 20 people, these 20 people will be motivated to learn by different things. They will have different approaches to learning, different preferences to learning. Some people, known as theorists, will want to know all the theory before they want to do anything. So these are the sort of people, if you're teaching them Excel, they would read all the kind of instructions, and then once they'd read all the instructions, then they would go and use Excel. Very much knowing the theory before moving on to the practical application. Reflectors like to watch and think about what's going on, so you might be demonstrating how Excel works or something of that sort there. They're liable to be quite quiet, rather non-participative, but they are kind of thinking maybe how that particular operation or command could be extended or used in other places. Activists don't like reading books. You can give them Excel and give them a guidebook. They'll be straight in there moving the cursor around, kind of trying things. If they couldn't get it to do what they wanted, then they would read the book, Almost the difference between the theorist and the activist is if you're given a bit of IKEA furniture. Some people will read all the instructions, lay out all the bits and so on, and when it's all laid out and counted, then they begin putting it together according to the instructions. The activist will kind of get all the bits out and try and put it together, and only when they get into trouble will they read the instructions, and then probably they've still got 3 bits left over at the end of it. A pragmatist is not motivated really by theoretical knowledge at all, or learning in a way. They are motivated to learn if there's a kind of promise that if I master this task, then I will do my job better or do my job more easily. They're looking for a very practical outcome to all of this theory. And these people will be really difficult to, I think, teach or to inspire if you couldn't argue for them to see, if you do this, then you'll be able to do your job better and you'll get more promotion and so on. Teaching them pure theory for saying it's good for your soul isn't going to work with them. The other big kind of theory on learning is Kolb and Experiential Learning. And Kolb says we go through a series of really cycles in learning. We have an experience. So let's say the experience is that we go in, we try to win a contract from a client, and we don't win it. And we think to ourselves, why didn't we win it? And there may be a number of different reasons, and we come out with a theory. Maybe the theory that we come out with is to say, well, all the other people who were pitching seem to have 3 different people speaking, and this gave the client a wider experience of staff and different specialties and so on. We only had 1 person pitching and speaking. Maybe that's what went wrong. And so the next pitch you go into, you try that theory out, and you have 3 people speaking. And if it still doesn't work, then in a way, that's your experience, and it doesn't work again. You reflect and say, well, I've tried 3 people, and it still doesn't work. I wonder why it didn't work. Maybe it's because the price is wrong and so on. So the idea is you go round and round this here, hopefully coming and learning bit by bit what works better through good or bad experiences and your theories and experiments about what is affecting it. Okay, so we have our people induced, we had them selected, now we've inducted them through their induction training. They are working, and now what we want to do is to motivate them. Motivation was once beautifully described as getting people to run towards a target rather than just kind of wandering half-heartedly towards a target. Motivated people are really keyed up, fired up, really keen and doing well. And there are all sorts of theories about motivation. I will just look at one here. Famous theory called Hertzberg's hygiene theory. It's what's called a two-factor theory because it looks at hygiene factors and motivation factors. And I think this is a curious word to be used, hygiene, here. Hygiene normally means being clean. And hygiene was brought in here by Hertzberg because he was using the analogy of a hospital. And he said, if you're ill and you go to a hospital, the first kind of prerequisite you must have is that the hospital must be hygienic. It must be clean. If it's not clean, it's only going to do damage. They have no hope of making you better if it's not hygienic. So if you like, this is your starting point. Then when you get the basics right, then you can apply the cure in the hospital. You can actually make people better. See, we're saying this is what's found in the workforce. There are certain things which must be right, otherwise you've got no hope of inspiring people. So the sort of things that Hertzberg put into the hygiene factors is as follows. You must believe you're being treated fairly. You must believe that, say, there's no undue discrimination against you. You're being paid less because you're a particular race or something, or you're being paid less because you're a woman rather than a man worker, and so on like that. There must be a feeling of fairness. The working conditions must be reasonable. Reasonably heated, reasonably ventilated, not too much noise, not too much dust and smoke and so on there. You must have reasonable working relations. If you go in and you're always in the kind of state of war with your boss and your colleagues, that's just going to be obsessive. You must feel that your pay is reasonable, that you're not being exploited, and so on. So fairness, reasonable conditions, reasonable wages and so on. You have to get right. If any of these is wrong, this will become such an issue with you that nothing else will work. And then on top of that, once you've got those right, you can have motivation factors. And the motivation factors that most theories of motivation talk about are things like challenge. You're given not just a routine task, but a task that makes you think a little bit, which is quite fun, therefore, to be thinking about it. That you are given recognition. So you do something well, your boss says, well done, your colleagues all say, oh, well done, they all see you're getting praise from your boss, and so on and so forth. That you can use some initiative. You're given some power to make decisions. Because if you're always just told what to do and can never make your own decisions, never make your own mind up, you can see that gets very wearing over a period of time. That you see what might be called personal growth. Yes, I'm learning skills. I'm getting better. And whether the skills are going to be good for promotion within this job, going to help you get another job, you're feeling you're growing and getting kind of better as a person. And these are normally the factors that are regarded as motivation. Of course, you can have money. Some sort of bonus being paid if you do well is also going to be a motivation factor. But it's important in looking at these motivation factors that there's more to motivation than money. Feeling you're improving, recognition, feeling of challenge and achieving a difficult target and people saying, oh, well done, and so on here. These are the things that really turn many people on in the workplace once you've got the hygiene factors in place. Now, we want to get these hygiene factors they should be in the workplace. We want to get the motivational factors in the workplace, but how can we get them in the workplace? And this is where job design comes in. So what we're trying to do in job design is to put in challenge and variety and initiative and recognition and so on here, which are the sort of qualities seen as valuable motivators. And job design is the deliberate changing what people do to try to introduce some of these elements to make the jobs better and more motivating. The characteristics which should produce good job design should improve the following outcomes. High intrinsic motivation. So an intrinsic reward is something that comes from internally. A feeling of growth and self-fulfillment, of learning and so on, is an intrinsic reward. Good job design should actually get you to do better. High job performance, not only in quality, but also maybe on your productivity in terms of the quantity of units you are producing. It will help your satisfaction, and that will lower turnover. It will mean you're likely to turn up on time. If you're waking up with a bit of a cold, you say, I'll go to work because I like work and I want to get this done and so on. Whereas if you don't have a good job that isn't stimulating, if you like, you wake up with a bit of a cold and you'd rather stay in bed. In practice, how is it done? And there are 3, maybe 4 methods that we'll mention here. Certainly of these 3, only the last one is likely to have any permanent improvement, if you like, in job design. Job enlargement really means doing more of the same. It's what would be called a horizontal chain, and both of these indeed are horizontal, meaning that they don't really be very successful at introducing more challenge and initiative and decision making and more skills. So if you are working in a car factory and you're standing at one particular place on the production line, the car's going past here, and your job is to put on the front wheels, then job enlargement would mean potentially you can put on the back wheels as well. So very much more of the same. Hardly, I think, going to have any influence at all on the qualities you perceive in that job and how it's going to be more motivating. Job rotation keeps it at the same kind of very basic level. This would say, right, this week you're putting on wheels, the next week you're putting on the bumpers, or the Americans would call them fenders and so on. Maybe the next week you're putting on the window wipers and so on there. But again, they're all basically manual jobs. Not a lot more skills involved, but at least you have a bit of variety now. Wheels, bumpers, washers, wheels, bumpers, washers, and so on, rather than just wheels all the time. Job enrichment really is then what's called a vertical change. Try to actually introduce more responsibility and more skills into this. And within the context of a car factory, you might say to somebody, right, your job is putting on wheels, but as the car comes past you, I want you to look at the paintwork. And if you see a little flaw in the paintwork, I want you to put a little bit of kind of sticky paper on it and so on. Because then when we see these little bits of sticky paper, they can go and try and polish out this little mark on the paintwork. So now what you're introducing to this is a kind of more responsibility for a little bit of quality control. In an accountancy context, a very basic job might be just doing debits and credits on the receivables ledger, but you could introduce a bit of job enrichment by maybe allowing that person to phone up customers and maybe say, look, you seem to have overpaid, or you seem to have paid slightly the wrong amount, and so on there. So you're introducing just that little bit more, certainly variety, but actually more responsibility, more challenge perhaps, than just doing the debit, credit all the time. Reward systems. Reward systems can also be important in motivation. First, we have to look at 2 bits of terminology, extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. I've mentioned the word intrinsic before. This comes from inside you, okay? So it's a psychological enjoyment and satisfaction maybe a feeling of having done a job well, maybe a feeling, oh, I've learned a new trick, a new skill, and so on. Here, that is intrinsic reward, and it's very important. Extrinsic rewards come from outside. It could be your boss saying, well done. It could be a promotion. It could be given a bonus. These are all given to you from outside, and these are extrinsic rewards. Now, dealing with pay is an extrinsic reward. Pay and thinking about pay and monetary rewards and bonuses and so on is a big area. And you can divide pay into 3 parts. There can be your basic pay, constant monthly amount. And then on top of that, very often at the end of the year, when people know how things turn out, they can make some sort of performance-related pay. And as well as the money you actually get in your hand, there can be indirect pay, which could be pension contributions, health insurance, life assurance, maybe the use of company cars, something of that sort. That would be indirect pay, perks, if you like. Now we're going to be looking here at the various ways maybe in which performance pay can be thought about. And these are the ways where it can be set out. So performance-related pay links additional payments directly to the performance of an individual or team. So if you hit a certain profit target, then you're going to get a certain amount of pay, a certain amount of bonus, and so on, either individually as a team. Incentive pay is really where you set the performance pay in advance. You tell people that if you hit these targets, if you hit these sales targets, get this number of new customers, cut the waste down from 10% to 5% and so on, or get productivity up. Productivity also often linked with incentive pay. Then you're going to get a 5% rise in your pay or something of that sort. Profit-related pay is looking at a whole organization, because ultimately it's a whole organization which has to afford the pay, and profit-related pay would wait to the end of the year, see what profit the organization has made, and then say, right, we're going to give some dividends out to our shareholders, but we'll also take this amount of money and we'll divide it in some way over our employees. Difficulty sometimes in that is knowing how much to give each employee within the organization. Simplest way is maybe just to give a percentage of their salary. Share-based plan is where you don't give people money, but you give them shares. And quite often you give them shares with the proviso they have to hang on to those shares for 3 years. And this is, or maybe they have to stay employed for 3 years before they can sell those shares. And this is a way of focusing people not on what's happened in the past, but you're saying to people, look, you've been given shares. These shares will go up in value, therefore your wealth will increase if we continue to do well in the future. Share-based pay, share-based bonuses, if you like, are very good at focusing employees' and directors' gaze onto what's important for shareholders, which are future profits and future share prices. Merit pay can kind of come out of the blue, really, for exceptional past performance. Maybe you're worried that somebody's going to be leaving, so suddenly you have this merit pay which they're going to be getting. It can encourage somebody to maybe stay until they become qualified for merit pay as well. Commission is a bit of a kind of performance-related pay, particularly used in conjunction with salespeople. They get a certain element of pay for every unit or every dollar's worth of sales which they make. And then team-based pay, another form of performance-related pay, where you reward the team. So rather than rewarding prima donnas within the team, you're trying to encourage members of the team to work together and to communicate with each other so that the team wins or loses rather than individuals winning or losing. For performance pay to be effective, you need certain things in place. It needs to be specific. We need to know on what basis we're going to get the pay. Okay, precise achievements are going to motivate people better than something kind of rather airy, like, well, if you do well, then you're going to get a bit of a bonus. Nobody knows what's meant by if you do well. And linked to that, it has to be quite measurable. We don't want there to be too much arbitrariness in there, because if bonuses look arbitrary, people begin to worry that managers are giving bonuses not to people who perform well, but giving bonuses to people they're friends with, or cronies with, and so on. And this can cause all sorts of resentment within the organisation. It must be achievable. People must believe, if I try a little bit harder, then I can get the 5% profit increase. And once I get the 5% profit increase, I will get my bonus. But if you said to people, you'll get your bonus if you make 100% profit increase, people will look at this mountain in front of them and say, well, I'm never going to get 100% profit increase. I may as well not even try. And they give up. And finally, it has to be a relatively permanent scheme. And also we need to achieve the target, if you like, by a certain time. So increase the profits by 5% at a year's time, not increase 5% over 10 years. That's not going to work either. A little bit in the syllabus is about the management of knowledge workers. Knowledge workers, think of a computer programmer, for example. Think of maybe a clever graphics designer. Think of somebody who's very good at marketing. These people are often very highly skilled, very highly talented. They often know their own worth, know how valuable they are, and have no fears about not getting another job were they to leave. And they can resent being told what to do. Apart from anything else, they may know and probably do know more about their subject and their speciality than you, the manager, knows. So they need to be handled in a way with kind of kid gloves. So the idea is that is if you tell somebody to do something, then they may rebel against that a little bit. It has to be much more kind of participative. Maybe show them how to do something rather than telling them how to do something. Because remember, they believe they can do it. They may have a variety of different rewards in mind which will turn them on. They're not always motivated by money. They may prefer time off, or they may prefer to have a sabbatical at the end of 2 years, and so on. They may prefer to be sent on a training course to learn new skills, or to be sent on a conference where they can discuss their subject of interest, rather than having time off. Keep them informed about the bigger picture. Again, these knowledge workers often get very kind of blinkered by the website they're developing. They may not know very much about other aspects of the business, and so we need to just make sure that they know what the business is for, and what its mission is for, what makes it tick, and encourage knowledge sharing. Both get them to share their knowledge and explain to other people maybe the difficulties in achieving something, but also have knowledge going to them, almost to break them out of their specialty a little bit and to see the bigger picture. Communication. Communication is an aspect that's very important within businesses. You can't really plan, coordinate, appraise people without communication. And there are, first of all, a number of directions of communication. If we think of our organization chart as like this, So we have the CEO at the top, we have maybe our main directors or heads of departments here, and then we've got the staff down here and so on here. Well, you can have vertical communication. In older organizations, it was very much the boss telling a subordinate what to do, and maybe the subordinate reporting back to the boss what the results were. Nowadays, we often expect the communication to be much more two-way, particularly if you have a knowledge worker down here who knows an awful lot more than the boss does up here. But that is vertical communication. You then have horizontal communication, like that. So maybe what we have is the web designer here who wants to talk to a marketing person here about how the products or the services should be presented on the web to be attractive to potential users of the website. And finally, we have diagonal communication, where somebody here is kind of talking maybe to a boss up there. So maybe we have the marketing person here has to maybe talk to the production director there, because the marketing person has heard that a customer has been a little bit, has a good idea perhaps about how the design of a product could maybe be improved, and we have to just talk to the manufacturing director here to see to what extent that is actually feasible. And that is diagonal communication. It can be formal or informal. Formal is often written type of communication. Informal is often more spoken communication. We're not saying one is right and one is wrong. We're just saying they're different. If you're being told that maybe you need to improve your performance a little bit, we'd probably all prefer to be told in an informal, friendly way, just giving a little hint. If we want to be told what next year's pay is or what next year's budget is, and so on, then really it has to be written down. It has to be very formal. Informal communication can be instant, but it suffers from the flaw that different people may be given slightly different stories. You inevitably change what you say, perhaps, as you talk to different people, perhaps in response to earlier people you were talking to. At least with formal communication, it's more likely everyone hears the right story, or the same story, and that's sometimes important. It takes longer maybe to write and to edit the formal communication, but maybe it's suitable for a lot of detailed information that people have to take away and absorb, whereas the informal communication tends to be better for short elements of communication where people don't have to absorb quite as much. Now, the process of communication is worth putting up here, and I'll just draw up what the process of communication is. And first of all, people talk about the thought. I want to communicate with you. The first thing I do is I formulate a thought. What do I want to communicate? And then what I do is I encode it. So I'm encoding in two ways. I'm writing stuff down and I'm talking. And then this information has to be transmitted. And here we're transmitting it essentially over the internet. And then what's going to happen is you're going to receive that and you have to decode it. So the thought, we encode it, we transmit it. You receive the information, you decode it. You have to listen to kind of what I'm saying and see if you can understand it. And from that there may be some action. You may put notes down on the piece of paper, you may annotate the printed notes and so on. And in quite a lot of communication process, after the action or at some point, there's maybe going to be feedback. So quite a lot of steps going on there, and the communication process can actually nearly break down at any phase. If I haven't formulated my thoughts properly, logically, communication isn't going to be good. If my writing is so bad that you can't follow it, and it nearly is, then I haven't encoded it very well. If the internet is down, you're not going to hear it. If you receive the information, but maybe when you're receiving the information there is a lot of distraction going on, you're not going to hear it very well, and so on. Maybe when you decode it, you misunderstand it. You get the wrong end of the stick from it. Maybe the action you take is inappropriate, maybe coming from the misunderstanding and so on here. So at each of these stages you have the potential of what's called a barrier to communication. Sometimes it's given the name of noise. Obviously noise, if you're listening to a lecture, the transmission and the reception, it can be real physical noise, but noise really means any interference with the process of clear communication, extraneous thoughts. Looking at Facebook as you're trying to look to the lecture, that is noise as well, and it will interfere, it will be a barrier to the communication. And we need to understand the barriers to communication to try to eliminate them, really. So the first barrier to communication is inappropriate language. It could be me suddenly speaking German to you, which wouldn't help most of you, but it's more likely to be terminology. You, maybe as a doctor, are using technical language to a patient, which a patient simply doesn't understand. It could be status. Perhaps the new person in the company is frightened to tell information that should be communicated to the boss. Maybe it's a very tall, narrow system, and the boss seems so many layers above that you are simply saying, I'm not going to communicate with this person. Maybe the boss is a bit arrogant and says, I don't want to listen to this new person. What could they possibly teach me? So there can be status problems, and at least some of that was got over as we moved from tall, narrow to wide, flat. Emotion. We've mentioned this when we talked about appraisal interviews. If people get very emotional, very upset and so on, then you don't properly take in what people are saying to you. The wrong medium. If I begin trying to explain very complicated, let's say, pension arrangements, I'm using a verbal mechanism of doing that, and there are all sorts of reliefs and cut-offs and allowances and so on your pension. Hearing that orally is not going to be very good. You won't be able to take in all of that information. Maybe what we need is written information as well as the written information, as well as the oral information, so you can have something to take away with you and study it carefully. Not wanting to transmit and not wanting to receive. We talked about one of the problems with the appraisal interviews as the boss being almost too kind, not wanting to tell people you're not doing very well. We all know people who don't seem to understand criticism, So, one of my children, they would never ever believe that at school they maybe hadn't performed very well. They would always look at the results which were good. They would never look at the results which were bad. And they always, where they didn't want to hear that they weren't so good at certain subjects and so on, that was kind of ignored. And people have a tremendous capacity for hearing the good news and ignoring the bad news. And then we have this maybe scourge of the information age, information overload. You go and Google something, you get hundreds of results coming out, and what is good information, what is bad information. We get maybe scores of emails a day, and we have to sift through these and so on. And of course the danger is that you're going through these emails, you're saying rubbish, 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 nothing to do with me, and you miss the one which has got that kind of vital piece of information in it. And again, that's a barrier to communication that has come simply because there's too much of it. And finally, the principles of negotiation. Negotiation is where you have two parties and they want to agree on something. It could be on a wage deal, it could be on a selling price. The prerequisite for successful negotiation is a willingness for the parties eventually to agree. Okay? If there's no real goodwill around and there's no incentive in it for them to agree, then the negotiation's probably not going to work. And here are the steps. First of all, you have to think carefully about what you want at the end of it. In many ways, you have to draw a line in the sand. You say, right, if you're selling items, I will not go below this price. If I'm going to that price, I will want them to buy at least 100. If they're buying this, I want them to promise that they're going to pay me my own currency so there's no exchange rate difficulties and so on there. Whatever it is, what is the minimum pay you're going to accept? What is the maximum price you're going to pay? You need to really think about where you want to be at the end of it. And then what you have to do is you enter into discussion with the other party. You try to find out what is important to them. You try to find out in a way where their line in the sand is. And understand their position, understand maybe some of their difficulties. And if you understand what really matters to them, sometimes you find out that it's easy for you to give, cheap for you to give, something which is important to the other person. So maybe if you negotiate selling something to somebody, they're not that concerned about the price. They've got some freedom on the price, but they have to get the goods by next week. So maybe what we do is we say, right, you can have them next week, but then the price is going to be a little bit higher. So you try to give way in what's cheap for you, what's possible for you to give way on, but which is very valuable to the other person. Negotiation isn't a matter of kind of pinning the other person to the ground and kind of punching them to pieces. Negotiation is win-win. If you pin the other person to the ground, the customer to the ground, and say, kind of punch them to pieces, getting the maximum possible price out of them, you might win that battle, but you're not going to get another order from them, the chances are. You want to try to get to a situation where both parties leave the negotiations happy with what they've got. Not maybe 100% happy, but pretty happy with what they've got. You want to reach agreement and make sure you've reached agreement. Go through all the little bits and pieces of agreement again, all the little clauses that you've been negotiating on, and evidence it in writing so that people can't forget, can't renege on what the agreement was, can't go back on what they said and so on, and then implement the agreement. So a process of coming together for the mutual benefit of both parties. If the negotiations don't work and things fall apart, then very often both parties suffer. In a wage negotiation, they go and strike, people don't get paid, and the business loses productivity. And it's not a great position to be in. So trying to go and, if necessary, using intermediaries to help you with the negotiations can often be very important.